This is my critical reflection for the process of creating a TIE performance for Year 1 students with the theme of light and dark. This presentation will show how our thoughts have moved our work on. It's all about our thoughts on the process. All the information has been taken from voice-recorded reflections made after every seminar, rehearsal and performance. Before we even started our workshop sessions with Alice and the others, I had already started to think about my experience of TIE. I was trying to remember what I could from primary school and secondary school, and what were the things that had stayed with me all this time. The main things that came to mind were the activities that were fun and interactive and informative. I remember one lesson where we saw a teacher figure acting like a monkey around the room, and this had such a great impact on the class because we were obviously a bunch of self-conscious teenagers, so seeing an adult do that. After hearing Carol Kirk's helpful tips on digital reflection, I began to record myself after every workshop, rehearsal and performance. It has been this process that has really helped in the creation of ideas and furthering our practice. The weekly readings that we were set really did help me in thinking more about what we were doing and why we were doing it. There were two writers that especially helped, and those were Dorothy Heathcote and Helen Nicholson. From the very first seminar, we discussed TIE companies from around the UK and abroad. One of the companies I looked at, Tip of the Iceberg, was very helpful for me to learn straight away what makes a TIE performance and what makes a successful TIE actor or facilitator. One of the most helpful things of that seminar was watching the video. One of the most important stages and turning points in my mind during the process was at the very beginning. We were set a task to perform on one of our first self-directed sessions, and for some reason the people in the group, we all started to speak about our ideas online before we met up. This may sound like a very small and trivial thing, but it actually helped us so much, because when we did meet up, we came with scripts already prepared, we had ideas, we'd spent so much time talking before we came together that straight away we were able to just dive. On the 2nd of October of this year, the group that I was performing in that week did a 2-minute piece bringing people into a space, which was meant to be an air raid shelter. And before we brought them into the space, we gave them all a tag with numbers on them, and we were only using torches and the sounds of an air raid. The feedback from the class was brilliant. One of the main things that the class liked was the tapered card, and Alice actually said, the quality of the props is absolutely critical. This is one thing that stood out in my mind, and this is something that we took on to our final performance. Another key piece of feedback was how we brought the people into the space. We'd asked them to hold hands. This was a good idea, but hadn't worked in the way we'd wanted to, as all the kids had, all the people in our class that were playing children had that card to hold on to, so found it difficult to hold hands. We'd split them up into smaller groups before we brought them into the space, and this made it a lot easier for those to enter the space. From these sessions, we came up with a few key words that really did aid every performance that we did from then on. One of the most helpful sessions was the self-directed session where we had to tell each other a story, and from there pick a story and perform it, using some kind of narration. Before attending this self-directed session, I'd recorded myself telling the story of the king's new clothes, so I was very prepared. By recording my lines and playing it back to myself, I could try to listen to the language that I used. Once we got into our group, the group in which we would stay in for the rest of the module, we began to think about everything we'd learnt in the previous weeks. Such simple things as talking before rehearsals and thinking about ways of narrating and the positioning of the audience were all key aspects of which we wanted to not only think about and talk about, but develop, make more interesting and suitable to the age of the audience. So once again, my use of recording myself and then reflecting back on that helped my practice, which then later helped my performance. Throughout our entire rehearsal process, we listened to the feedback of others. We spoke a lot about our progress and where we were going to go from here. The initial idea of starting with the theme of light and dark proved quite tricky because it was so broad. So we began to start thinking about all different types of stories and myths, legends, sciencey aspects, more arty aspects, religious aspects, and eventually we came to the theme of Diwali. After looking through the national curriculum objectives, we wanted to kind of teach but without teaching, and in a more creative way. We realised that using the ideas of day and night and the light and absence of light, we could fit our story of Diwali in quite well with the national curriculum. We began planning, we made a skill set, everyone took on different roles, mine was the teacher's pack, and our process of rehearsal really took off. We looked up the school's Ofsted report, which was very helpful to gain a better idea of the school itself. We also went and met the children and we met the teacher. We had a look at their classroom and just watched them in one of their lessons. After researching different stories of Diwali and looking at different theorists' ideas and work, it took us some time to get on our feet and find our own rhythm. But once we did find our rhythm, we realised that our way was a way of playing with narration. We decided to take the idea of embodied narratives further. We wanted to make the narrators multi-layered, more playful, so there'd be lots for the children to engage with. This idea we got from Helen Nicholson and from her writings. For me, she was one of the main theorists that really helped me understand theatre and education. From our own personal research and our weekly reading, we came around this idea of metaxas. This kind of furthered our idea of making the narrator playful, as we really wanted to embrace the fictional world that the children would be caught up in, but also them understanding that it is all fiction. From here we realised that our acting had to be as brilliant as possible, and our quality of delivery, which is one thing we, in hindsight, should have thought more about, because the area in which we were performing was a school hall which has very different acoustics to our usual rehearsal space. This entire module has been a very new and enlightening experience for myself. I seem to have a much clearer idea of what performance means in terms of the type of audience you're performing to and the space in which you're doing that and the reason for the performance. One thing that's really changed for myself is the way in which I use the theory that I'm learning each week. I seem to be much better at kind of trying to connect that to my practical process. The way in which I've also used digital equipment in recording myself with speaking about seminars and taking photos of the space used and the way in which props and staging are set has really helped me to see that by keeping on top of things and reflecting back after a busy day and listening back a few weeks later, there are so many things that I would otherwise have missed. If I had to repeat this whole process again, I would definitely do many things in a similar way, with the reflecting after lessons and speaking to classmates before rehearsals. But one thing I would definitely do is get better acquainted with a new space. And also, if possible,